We've talked about a number of these intersections between Medicaid planning and estate planning and Medicaid planning and planning for incapacity or disability. Another one I wanted to just cover quickly is the notion of estate recovery. And every state has a system in place where, if they cover your long-term care costs after you might be able to qualify for that coverage, but then after you pass away, the states will go after certain assets that you own and try to recoup those to reimburse themselves for the costs that they covered. So one element of Medicaid planning, in my view, is always qualification. You want to do that as early as possible. But the best planning, ideally permanently protects these assets and shields them from estate recovery as well. How does estate recovery work in Pennsylvania? What types of assets are they going after? And how do some of these planning strategies we've discussed fit into that picture?
Great question. And yet you're right. We don't just get the person in the door of the nursing home and then call it a day. We think long term. So you're right that federal law requires every state agency that administers Medicaid to go into an estate recovery action to recoup the costs of Medicaid. Now, how the states do that varies from state to state. So some states have something called enhanced estate recovery, where it's hard to protect any assets from that repayment to the government down the road. Pennsylvania is not one of those states. So they're going after probate assets. So they've paid for your care, they've paid for your loved one's care, and they don't try to recoup the money until after the loved one has passed away. At that point, they know how much was paid in care. They're going to look for probate assets, which means that an estate has been opened in the county courthouse. Some sort of notice has been published as part of our probate process that it goes up like a flare to all creditors and says, if you have any claim against this person who is now deceased, now's the time to step up and assert your claim, and we'll figure out how to pay you out of the available resources. So that's as soon as that happens, Medicaid gets in line and they say, we paid all this money for care. Now, that's only for probate. So what doesn't go through probate? Well, if you have a trust, it doesn't go through probate. Your estate gets administered privately, so there is no estate recovery. Another thing we do, though, so what would be probate property? Anything titled in that person's name. So in a bank account, anything, if their name is on the title of a house, that could be probate property that could be subject to estate recovery. So that number one question that people seem to ask when they come in for their first meeting with us is, I don't want to lose my house. How do we avoid losing the house? The house is not the problem when you get eligible, as you said, that first step process of just getting eligible. The value of the house doesn't put you over the eligibility limit as far as limited assets. But you need to worry about the house in terms of estate recovery down the road. So for married couples, it's a lot easier than it is with single people. Often what we'll do is transfer the deed of the house from husband and wife jointly to just husband if wife is going into care. So that way, it doesn't make a difference for eligibility because that's not a non-countable asset. But down the road, once wife goes through her care and eventually passes away, Medicaid's going to show up, but if they don't see a house in her name, they're not coming after it. So that's one way to avoid estate recovery. That's the most common way to avoid losing the house, as people tend to say it. So, and this also comes up for, since you mentioned special needs people with disabilities, there is a certain kind of trust. So imagine somebody who has a birth injury and they have, some sort of lifelong problem that they have to live with, a disability that resulted from a personal injury, essentially, and they get a settlement. That's their money. But the deal with the government is the government will pay them Social Security and Medicaid so that they have money for food and shelter and health care. But the deal is you're going to hold that in a certain kind of first party trust. It's that child's money for the rest of their life to sustain them. But the deal is there's a payback provision. So the same concept comes into play with special needs law, where there's an estate recovery component to it. And there are ways to plan for these things, but that's definitely something to keep in mind.